creating cultural awareness and understanding. This is Culture Clique. Culture Clique is written and produced by KQAL FM on the campus of Winona State University.
Today on Culture Clique, we return to the No Name Bar for a Part 2 continuation of this nerdtastic monthly event, Nerd Nite. Nerd Nite is a beer-filled history channel to those who are passionate enough to speak to their heart's content. So if you enjoy knowledge more than anyone, or perhaps you're passionate enough on a topic to be called a nerd, well then this safe haven of nerdvana is the place to be. So take a seat, grab a drink with some friends, because it's Nerd Nite from the No Name Bar, today on Culture Clique.
First time using a microphone. It's about time. I am the master baker at Castle Rock Sourdough. This is my wife, Britta. She's got a more difficult job. She has to train me. She's the head baker and founder. We like to sing as we bake bread. It just goes more easily. When I first saw Britta across a crowded room, as the old song says, she was singing. And I said to myself, she's not from around here. Maybe she's from Sweden. She sure fooled me. Now she's going to fool all of you into thinking in this next song of ours, our first song, that her mother and father were Irish.
Is my mic on? Can you hear me? Is my mic on? Just checking. It's my second time using a mic.
I'm up in the morning early to greet the dawn of day. To the lint whites piping, many's the tune I play. One pleasant eve in June time I met a Lochry man. His face and hands were weazened, his height was not a span. He poured me for my fiddle, you know, says he, like you. My father and mother were Irish, and I am Irish too. He took my wee red fiddle, and such a tune he turned. The Galatian it whispered, the Leonin it murned. He said, my lad, you're lucky, I wish I were like you. You're lucky in your birth star and in your fiddle too. He gave me back my fiddle stick also, and stepping like a May boy, he jumped the lyre, yet no. I never saw him after, nor met his gentle kind. But whilst I think I hear him weeping in the wind. Oh, my father and mother were Irish, and I am Irish too. I bought a wee fiddle for 9 pence. It is Irish too. I'm up in the morning early to greet the dawn of day. And to the lint whites piping, many's the tune I play. And to the lint whites piping, many's the tune I play.
What's the instrument that you're playing?
It's called an auto harp. You know, it's not a real instrument. Not like your smartphones. It's also called a corded zither. The buttons do the work for you to find the chords, and the rest is magic.
So what you're doing, you're pulling the strings, right?
Yes, I'm strumming. real out-of-heart players pluck. And they often wear finger picks, but...
Well, I'd like to get into the next part of our talk. We had promised to tell you that how we met was in March of 2020 when COVID first set in, and people were still eating bread, and I was still baking. And one day, after we had met, I said, would you care to help me for a few hours in the bakery in exchange for a few loaves of bread? And so he came right along, and he'll tell you the rest of the story.
We were having fun forming dough. It can be really fun. Singing songs, even in Latin. And she said to me, you look a bit gray. And I thought to myself, well, I am 58, but give me a chance. And actually, I was looking a bit grayish, and I was feeling a bit dizzy. But never mind, because whenever I'm having too much fun, that's usually how I feel. So keep your stretchers ready. Well, later that weekend at the hospital, the doctors told me you definitely had some kind of a heart event.
Well,
it's been all heart since then. And we were married in October last.
Yes.
Yes. Forget the rest of the story.
Oh, that's...
Thank you.
Let's see. Well, as for making sourdough, I guess we just felt like singing a song to you. We do like to sing at the bakery. I wanted to tell you a few things about making sourdough. First of all, we all hear a lot about kneading bread, but technically people that make sourdough are not supposed to knead the bread. They handle it very gently, because if you handle sourdough too firmly, you will destroy it and will not rise. So I actually have a piece of dough here, and at home I have 9 bins this large on the average day preparing for Wednesday's baking. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This is a small bit of dough, and instead of kneading for sourdough, we pick up the dough, and it's called stretch, and I'm gonna fold it in half. I just folded it, and then we turn the dough the other direction, and we pick it up again. Woo, there it goes. Hope it's not going on sound equipment. And stretch and fold again, and we'll stretch and fold it for as many times until it's getting too stiff to make a decent fold. That's looking pretty good. That was 3 stretch and folds. Most days, if I'm going to be baking the next day, I'll be up at 6 or 6:30 starting to mix the dough. That dough will not be baked for another 36 hours. So all the dough for sourdough has a very slow and long rise. And that is the key to getting a good flavor and to getting better nutrition. And let's see, I better look at my outline because I had some things I was going to tell you. It will be cooled in a cool room at 46 degrees, and like Sandy, I do have a cool bot, and it's run by an air conditioner, and I keep all my dough in this cool room for somewhere between 24 and 36 hours because it comes in and out of the cool room as we work with it. Now, let's pretend that it is the next day, because I would have been stretching and folding this off and on for 24 hours, and let's say it is tomorrow morning now, and in fact tomorrow morning I will be taking one of these, and we will be cutting the dough at that time into bread-sized chunks, and this is more like a bread-sized chunk, and we'll be forming it, and this dough is going to be a little hard to form because it's too wet and I don't have any flour. Some people prefer to form wet dough. And if it were morning, this would be a very nice round glob of dough. It's not yet bread. And we would let it sit there for a bench rest. And a lot of people say to me, well, wait a minute. Most of the bread I buy from you is this shape, and why are you doing that? Well, you always form it into a round first. That gives it the strongest ability to rise and hold its shape. And these are various baskets called bannetons, and they're made out of wood. And after this dough would be shaped, it will be going in this banneton for another 6 to 8 hours of rising. which we vary the temperature. We might start part of the rise at the room temperature of 70 degrees, and depending on how far into summer we are, we could leave it out there for a number of hours, and then we'd put it into the room that has the cool bot, which can bring down the temperature to approximately 46 degrees is what I prefer for my sourdough. As you can see, there's different shapes that you can use, different sizes. I used to do more round shapes, but when people found out that I would do a dough or a bread this shape, this is the shape they all wanted. It's easier to cut and make sandwiches out of.
Where did you get those shapes?
Pardon?
Where did you get those shapes?
This is the standard shapes that you can buy bannetons in. Seems to be regulated a bit. And I brought this. It's an antique dough trough. And in the old days, in the 1800s and earlier, this one's probably from the 1800s, instead of stretching dough in a little dishpan, they would be mixing it in here and stretching and folding it. And the bakeries had one that would be from here to here, and several men would participate in picking it up and stretching it over. So it is can be a labor-intensive, heavy work. Our heaviest thing that we do is lift the mixer bowl, which I should weigh it someday, really, to be more accurate, but it's somewhere between 90 and 120 pounds, and we lift it together always. Except once in a while, there's somebody young at the bakery who lifts weights and lifts it all by themselves. I don't want to name names right now. Okay, so I'm going to take this. Here is this, and let's pretend it had a bench rest of, I prefer a bench rest of 1/2 hour, but this one didn't get it, but we'll do it anyway. I'm going to try to form it into the shape of putting it into, let's see, this is the most popular one to put it in. So we'll be putting it in there. I have to roll it in rice flour, and I didn't bring any rice flour tonight, so I am not putting it in there. And it will be going into that for 6 to 8 hours, and then we'll be baking it. We used to bake in the early morning. We used to try to bake right before the farmer's market started, and because I said I have to bring the bread very hot to the market. I thought that was just what you did. And well, it turned out that to do that, we would get 1 hour's sleep and we'd still arrive late to the market. I'm sorry, everybody, about that. But I'm trying to improve, and now I'm able to come to the market on time by usually baking the night before or even the night before. And sourdough is very good for preservation. Anybody who's done both will see that sourdough can withstand being in the air or even in a bag much longer than the commercial bread that's treated with preservatives, which is very interesting because sourdough is made with flour, water, salt, and a natural leaven. There is no commercial yeast in it. Let's see. I wanted to mention, yes, I have a few sample loaves. We just baked these a few hours ago. We got out of the bakery around 6 or 6:30 tonight. And this is one of the ones that it was risen in this here. So you can see it does gonna get a little bigger. We roll this out onto a baking sheet. We sprinkle it with rice flour. We take very sharp razors and we cut the design in. And then we take that baking sheet, which has 3 breads on it, and we toss it into a 500-degree oven. And it looks like when we toss it in, have you ever seen those flying carpets? It's sort of like tossing a big flying carpet with 3 loaves of bread and making it land in the right place. And if it doesn't land, we reach in with our hand and pull it out to the right place. So here's another example. This is a smaller one. Let's see here. We have a few specialty breads that we make. This is the 7-grain rye. The top seller is the white sourdough. This rye is also a sourdough. This one takes 3 days to make because I will be soaking the seeds for 24 hours before adding them to the dough. This is jalapeno cheddar, which has, as you can imagine, it has cheddar and jalapenos in it. And People like that one too, I guess. I forgot to bring cinnamon raisin. Let me think here what else I was planning to tell you. I wanted to make a few statements about the health benefits of sourdough. Not only does the long rise time help it to ferment, and it gives you increased nutrition, because there's things on grains called phytates, and those are nutrient blockers. Now, if you ferment a grain, it will disable the nutrient blockers, and so you will actually get all the nutrition that is in that grain. Now, I have historically tried to eat good food, and so I used to just go to the store and get whole wheat bread, because I thought that's going to be really healthy for me. And the thing about that is, if it is not sourdough, if it is not long fermented, unfortunately, you will not be able to get all of the nutrition out of those wonderful grains because of phytates, which are blocking that nutrition. So I do recommend, if you want the best nutrition, to eat sourdough. The other thing is I have many customers who have health problems because of gluten, which is in quick rise bread. That's the other thing that's very nice about sourdough. It is low gluten because the long fermentation process eats up the gluten. So let's say that I do not have the statistics, but let us say that quick rise bread has this much gluten. And let's say it's a possibility that sourdough has about that much. And then let's say a possibility, and this is a fact, that the longer the rise, the less the gluten. And because I raise mine to the highest amount of rising, we could say that I potentially have this much gluten. I don't know. I don't have the statistic on that. But I know I have much less gluten, and I know that people that get very sick and ill with eating quick rise bread are my devoted customers, and they can eat my bread every day with no ill health problems and actually thrive with my bread. So I'm very happy to be able to provide that product to anybody who wants it. I wanted to mention that Louis Pasteur saw this coming in the 1850s. He was a French scientist, as most of you know, and I don't know how he figured this one out, but at that time, the French bakers were getting pressure all over the world. Food was starting to change. They were trying to mechanize, is that the word? Mechanize everything, and they're trying to pass around quick rise yeast to all the bakers, and Louis said, hey, don't do that. Do not use quick rise yeast. I predict massive health problems if you start making bread with quick rise yeast. And look at what we have experienced here with celiac disease, people that have gluten problems. And if they really would have listened to Louis Pasteur, and actually the French bakers did for the most part, because most every French baker is still making sourdough bread. They don't call it sourdough. That's an American term that came with the gold rush, and they called the men that were carrying a little starter around in their covered wagon, they called them sourdoughs. But most breads in France, most European artisan breads are sourdough, and they have that added health benefit and the history of giving their people good food that actually will nourish them and not make them sick. One last thing I'd want to recommend, if you do have a health problem, please, if you're going to go for eating sourdough bread, use some discretion. Don't just go to the store and say, hey, this says sourdough on it, because I'd say 90 to 95% of the bread in stores is actually quick rise bread with vinegar added or another flavoring, and they are allowed to call it sourdough. So if you have a health problem, you do need to be discerning. Check your source. One good thing is to say, how long do you raise your bread? If they say anything less than 12 hours for a raise time, then it's probably quick rise bread. So don't fall prey to that. Let's see. I was going to open it up for questions. If anybody had any questions, David or I would be happy to answer them.
Yeah, questions for Brenda. Thank you very much. Here we go. Tell us about your designs on the bread.
Pardon?
Tell us about the designs on your bread.
Well, we favor certain designs that remind us of wheat at times. And sometimes we just experiment and try to think of what is pretty. And David recently did a design of the Winona Bridge, which was pretty popular. And we just experiment and have fun.
So if you ask a question, you get a prize. I forgot the prizes. I'm sorry.
Okay. One loaf of bread down.
We're especially looking for people who have not had Castle Rock sourdough before. All right, Joyati, here we go.
I always like to know the history of this. Like, when did you start? I mean, you were a young girl, or when did you start? I mean, your grandparents, or how did all start to the sourdough bread for you?
Well, technically, my mother did make a whole or a wheat bread with oatmeal in it, and she did soak her oatmeal, which is very similar to the process I use for soaking the rye grains. And that rye bread does have oatmeal soaked as well. It has 7 grains in it as well as rye. And she also put a little molasses in, which I put in my bread. Within the rye bread, excuse me. That's the only bread that has anything like that in it. And as for when did I start, I think I started baking in my teens or 20s. I'm sure I was baking bread all that time. All the way through adult life, I have 7 children, and I was baking bread for them. And I started to experiment with sourdough. And I probably made sourdough for just my family I really haven't calculated the years, probably 20, 25 years. And then at one point I needed a job, and I was like, what job should I do? And I thought, well, I'd like to work at home. I've always valued that lifestyle. And so I first started baking under the cottage food license, and I used 3 home ovens that were probably 50 or 60 years old. And I just started baking as many as I could and taking it to the Winona Farmers Market and the Goodfew Farmers Market. Well, I could only produce 18 to 20 loaves of bread because for sourdough you have to put it on a stone and cover it with a rather large covering. That's only 1 loaf per oven. So I was running between these 3 ovens, and to get 18 loaves of bread, I could only sleep for 1 hour. And I said, well, I'm either quitting this, it's been fun, I'm either quitting or I'm going to see if I can put a little commercial bakery on part of my property. So I did use an existing space on my property, which is called Castle Rock Farm or Castle Rock Sourdough. And I made a small commercial bakery, which is now licensed, and that's why I'm able to sell to stores and restaurants now.
How many ovens do you have now?
Well, I have one big oven. I have 2 ovens, but I have one big oven that's from here to here. I have to actually get on a step stool to load the top deck. There's 4 decks in it, and it's fashioned after a European sourdough oven with a stone deck and steam, but it was made by an American manufacturer that was able to give me a very nice price on that. And that's the main one I bake all the white sourdough in. I do some of the specialty in that, and then I have another Blodgett gas convection oven that has 6 shelves in it. So we're just loading and unloading to get all that in.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we got one here. Sue?
Hi, I'm just wondering if you can tell us about your sourdough starter and when you actually physically started it and how you keep it going.
Yes, thank you for asking. And one of the prizes that you could choose to win is...
would you like some sourdough starter?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, nice.
Okay, so that is some of the starter, and you got the instruction sheet on how to maintain the starter, and then you also got my recipe for the white sourdough and a multi-grain sourdough. It's the exact same recipe I'm using, and how old is my starter? Well, somebody gave me some starter, and I added it to it, and they said it was 150 years old, but I don't put a lot of weight into that because it was a very generous, nice person that did that, but a lot of people that are giving away starters are giving away a starter that either they or the person before them neglected for a good amount of time. And once they've neglected that starter, it's just like a bit of glue, and it's not holding the microorganisms that you need to make a really good loaf of bread. They might start feeding it someday, and they might start stirring it nicely and get a very good starter, but it really is no longer the 150-year-old original microorganisms that belong to that, unless they had, maybe they were a family of bakers, and everybody in that family knew you must stir that starter every day, or if you're keeping it in the refrigerator, every 2 or 3 days, but you cannot neglect it for 3 months and say it's this 150-year-old starter. So my starter is approximately 5 years old at this time, but I have owned many starters through the 25 years, and I alternately have killed some of them, and then asked other people if I could have their live starter and restarted.
All right, we have time for 2 more questions. I've got one right here.
I come from a background of having been an organic farmer and flour miller. Yes. And so aside from the rye and the multigrain flour, does sourdough by chance connotate whole wheat, whole grain?
Well, that's up to the individual baker at every case. And many sourdough bakers are baking a high portion of whole wheat. I'd say my first portion is the white sourdough, which in every loaf has a portion of stone ground whole wheat and rye. Okay. I have a small portion. It's mainly for flavoring and some nice color. Then my second most popular selling bread is the rye, which contains 7 different grains, including stone ground whole wheat, rye, whole grain rye that is soaked, rye chops, which is like rye oatmeal. It has oats, flax, millet, and caraway, I believe.
Does it go unsaid that you can tell how whole wheat the bread is by looking at the end view having been cut, so the center of the loaf will clearly be whiter or darker related to whole wheat or
sure.
Whole wheat?
So this is my darkest loaf, which it's rye with it also has stone ground whole wheat and other grains that I told you about, and it's a dark loaf all the way through. I'm not sure if I understood your question properly.
So you see a loaf that the inner part of it is quite white. It probably doesn't have much whole wheat in it.
Correct. But you won't see an inner part that is white in this bread. It's dark all the way through. That's all. Yeah. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
We have one last question back here.
Yeah, it's a quick question. You and your apron are very beautiful, and we are wondering if there's a backstory behind your apron.
Well, thank you about the apron and your kind compliment toward me. I really appreciate that. And I have always been enamored with aprons. When my girls were younger, we all made aprons together, and that one wore out so much I can't wear it anymore. I've thought it's on the shelf to be repaired. And then this one I just bought somewhere, and I always try to wear an apron because I'm almost always baking or doing something with bread, so it protects my clothes as much as possible.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to do, yeah, thank you very much. All right, we're going to do our second drawing. If you want a drum roll on your knees.
Do you want to draw? Brian Nout?
Brian Knopf? Is Brian Knopf here?
Does he?
Yeah.
Pardon?
Nice.
You don't want to sing. Well, we'd like to thank you for coming and listening all about Castle Rock sourdough bread. I wanted to tell you one last thing, is that on Wednesdays you can buy our sourdough bread directly hot out of the oven from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. And we have picnic tables, and you can bring your own cheese and lunch meat, fruit, whatever else you want to drink, and have a picnic right up by the bakery, and you can watch our goats and chickens graze around. It's a pretty scene in the shadow of the barn and the bakery. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. If you want to hear those details again, Carl has them on nice little sheets of paper that are going out right now. We're going to take a 5-minute break again, and when we come back, we'll have our last speaker and our last drawing. Our last speaker, John Mauser. So stick around.
Big thanks to the staff of Nerd Nite as well as the No Name Bar for making this whole event possible. Be sure to tune in next week for a Part 3 continuation of this amazing event, Thursdays at 12:30 p.m. Otherwise, be sure to check out Nerd Nite on their Facebook at Nerd Nite Winona, visit winona.com or nerdnite.com. To keep up with all things Winona or the surrounding Midwest area, tune in to Culture Clique Thursdays at 12:30 p.m. here on 89.5 KQAL, online at kqal.org, on the app, on your favorite smart speaker, or wherever you get your general pod stuffs. I'm Don Alzate, keeping it nerdy.
Creating cultural awareness and understanding. You've been listening to Culture Clique. Support for Culture Clique is made possible by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Culture Clique is produced by KQAL FM on the campus of Winona State University. For more information, look us up on the web at kqal.org. And thanks for listening to Culture Clique.